Hi, I'm Anthony Wilson, the Public Information Officer for the City of San Angelo, and this is a special episode of The City. We are here with the heroes of the day, if you will, regarding our recent water main break and the boil water notice. And in case you were living under a rock during that time, there was some yeoman's work, some outstanding, heroic work going on by a lot of city employees in order to resolve that situation as quickly as possible. And although it did involve some inconveniences with the boil water notice, I think one of the important things is that throughout that, everyone in San Angelo maintained water service, and it did help to sort of spotlight the fact that too often we take for granted when we flush a toilet or turn on a tap that there's just automatically going to be water, because there usually is, but it's chiefly due to, again, the heroic work of our water utilities employees. And so joining us today is our Assistant Director of Water Utilities, Lance Overstreet, our Water Distribution Superintendent, Nathan Tim. So first of all, guys, thank you for just an incredible job last week, because it was a difficult circumstance from beginning to end, and yet you guys sort of pulled through in an amazing sort of way. So on behalf of the community, I mean, I feel compelled to say thank you for that service.
Well, we appreciate that, and also too, I just want to echo that thanks to all the citizens, Anthony, that did kind of partner with us, tried to reduce things, were understanding, especially to Nathan and all the crews in the city that worked several days in a row, a lot without sleep. And then also too, we had a couple of contractors that just stepped up and threw in some services and teams that helped us out. And so we just want to thank everyone really that came about as being a part of the solution.
Well, and that's why I wanted to do this talk with you guys. Unfortunately, our Emmy Award-winning videographer, Brian Groves, was out sick last week when this occurred with pneumonia. And so we don't have the spectacular video that we normally would have in this sort of circumstance. But it's really important that people fully understand what you guys did and how you did it in order to maintain service and get us out from underneath that boil notice. So first of all, Lance, walk us through what happened beginning Tuesday afternoon. How was it first noticed that something with our water system was amiss?
Sure. What's interesting, Anthony, about a lot of the leaks we get is that our water plant, who monitors the tank levels and the pressure, a lot of times they'll see something happen, and usually by the time they see something happening, in a normal scenario, there's usually water coming out of the ground somewhere. We start getting calls that, hey, there's a leak here, leak there. And so our response times can be fairly quick because we know what's going on. In this particular instance, the plant let us know that, hey, there is a major leak. We're seeing levels drop in our tanks very rapidly, and yet we were not getting any calls that there was a leak anywhere. We were getting calls that people didn't have pressure. They were turning on the faucet and there was not water coming out, but really there was no calls as to where this leak was. And so usually when that happens, it means that the leak is in a more remote place, and most likely all the water is going into a draw somewhere. And so after looking around the city for a bit and trying to find it, we actually started focusing our attention on those draws and the water crossings where you drive across in an area where there's a channel. And that's how we actually found the leak.
So you really had no idea prior to finding the leak where it was?
We had no idea where it was or the magnitude of it, really, or what line it was on, what size line it was on, anything like that. And so what we did find, it was a fairly major line. It was a 36-inch line that had ruptured. And what was also interesting is that we have 5 storage tanks around town that we use for either 1, maintaining pressure, or 2, storing water. And this leak actually, within about an hour and 20 minutes, drained 2 of those tanks completely. And so this was, according to our plant operator, he said he had never in his entire career, over 20 years, seen anything go that fast in terms of the amount of water that was coming out of the leak itself.
So Nathan, from a water distribution standpoint, how did this compare to what you guys normally see when there is a water main break somewhere in the city?
This ranks right up there at the top. This, when you can drain the tanks that quickly, and you go into a panic mode of trying to find it as quickly as you can to try to isolate it. It ranks right up there. It ranks right up there since 2006 when it happened once before, in that same remote area. But yeah, it was pretty major.
And at the time, you were actually home on the couch, sick, and so you had to get up out of your sick bed and get to work.
I had just got home and I wasn't feeling well, and my phone started just blowing up, and I was actually on the phone with my water coordinator when he found the leak and thought, oh, this is about to be bad. This is going to be a several-day event, you know, and sure enough, that's what it turned out. You know, it could have been a lot worse, but luckily we were able to isolate it and get it pretty quickly.
So we were receiving some reports of some low water pressure, no water pressure, particularly in the south and southwest portions of the city. But one of the things that really impressed me is once you found the leak, you got the valves turned off so that there wasn't water flowing to that particular portion of the pipeline. You began to reroute water, Lance, to throughout the system to ensure that everyone in San Angelo had water service. Water service. So talk a little bit about what's involved with something like that.
Sure. We actually have what they call two different pressure planes here in the city, a high plane and a low plane. And what's nice about the way that that system is configured, that is in times of difficulty in one plane or the other, a lot of times we can turn certain valves and actually begin to feed through those different planes into the other plane to be able to supply water. And so we were able to do that to some extent. It did also require that we make some valve changes on some manifolds and some of our pump stations to push water into different directions in different areas. And the water treatment plant that actually, the water production plant that manages all of that, a lot of people don't realize, but they had guys that actually stayed up 2 nights fully just to monitor that and to help facilitate that. And so it was a couple of late night discussions that took place to try to come up with a solution for that. And that was really how that was able to come about.
And it was really critical in the morning times, I guess. That's our peak usage, just to ensure that there was enough pressure built up to get us through that peak time, right?
And not only the pressure, but a lot of people don't realize, because to them they turn on the tap every day and it just runs. But during the evenings, a lot of times when the usage is lower, we are actually using that time to actually fill those tanks. And so unfortunately, with the 2 tanks now with no water in them, we are having to reroute and change and actually hold one pressure plane with just the plant power, and not having those tanks available to help monitor that and help stabilize that pressure. And so it was an issue where they were having to fill for a little bit into one tank, switch the system over, fill another tank to hold that pressure, and they were just constantly going back and forth between the different tanks to kind of maintain things in the city.
So there was a lot of strategy involved, it sounded like. So a lot of people just assume whenever there's a boil water notice that it's because there's some sort of contamination that has occurred within the system, and that wasn't really the case here. Talk about why the boil water notice was issued.
Sure. One thing that the boil water notice does is it's a preventative thing. It's designed to be something just to kind of make sure that there's nothing going on. And the way the guidelines is with TCEQ is that if your system has a system-wide outage where you lose pressure down below 20 pounds, then you have to issue a boil water notice. And the reason for that is because when the pressure drops down to a certain level, you have the likelihood of other water coming back into the system. And one thing that I had explained to a few people is, say that you've got a watering trough and you've got some animals that drink out of that trough, and you have that faucet on just a little bit running to keep that trough full. Well, if all of a sudden the pressure goes to 0, what ends up happening is that hose that you have in that trough becomes a siphon, and literally will pull the water from the trough back into the system. And so, not that occurred in a large scale, but that's kind of an idea of how you can get contaminants in the system when the pressure goes down too low. And so it's not that we have found or documented any case of contaminants, but it just has the potential that when that pressure goes down, to allow water into the system, to backflow into the system that wouldn't normally be there, that has the possibility of having contaminants.
So the pressure within the system helps to keep potential contaminants from entering that system.
It does, from not only sprinkler systems, but like I said, the other faucets, hose bibs, even water infiltration from the groundwater can also be introduced back into the system when the pressure goes down.
And again, if this had happened in a neighborhood, let's say one of those Southland neighborhoods, because this was in the southwest part of the city, but if it had happened in a neighborhood where the water break would have been immediately noticed because there'd have been water gushing out of the ground, would all of this have been averted?
I would like to say that it's likely that it wouldn't have been, because had we been able to respond to the leak faster and known where it was, we may have been able to isolate things prior to losing the pressure from those two tanks, and it may not have had quite the impact. But there again, you know, there's a lot of variables there to say definitely that it wouldn't have.
So Nathan, I want to ask you a question. I know the answer to, but I think it's going to surprise a whole lot of people who are watching this. How often does a water main break in the city of San Angelo?
We have a bunch. I'd say a week, which, you know, our system's fairly old. We may have 5 to 10, you know, of these a week, not at this on the scale, you know, but 6 inches, 8 inches, 4-inch mains. They're just antiquated and just, you know, they're a lot older. But, you know, my guys are out 24/7, all during the night, all the time. You know, they never stop, and it just takes something like this to really shed light on the work that these guys do, because they do it all the time and it's very normal to them. This just so happened to be such a large pipe that affected so many people. But yeah, we're dealing with water main breaks, you know, all the time, and these guys get them done and move on. But
so it's really on a daily basis, and people wonder, well, how can that be? And what they don't understand is when you have 600 plus miles of pipe in the ground, that's sort of the nature of the beast. It sort of goes with the territory of having a large infrastructure like that.
Yes, it does. We work and we replace what we can a year. You know, we're always upgrading the system, but it's just, like you said, it's 600 plus miles of piping, and it takes a long time and a lot of finances to get that done. But it's an ongoing process that we're trying to relieve it. But yeah, it's leaks all the time.
Well, and water main replacement is something that never comes to an end. I mean, it'll be a continual thing as long as the city of San Angelo exists.
Right. And that's another thing too, is that people need to understand is that, you know, every pipe that's in the ground has a life expectancy. And so in the perfect world, you get the 50 years, which is what's estimated on a lot of these, but there's some that don't make it that far. There's some that make it further. But even if you go through and replace every one of them, at some point you're going to be back in there replacing it again.
You know, a lot of people just naturally assume that this must have been an old pipe that had outlived its usefulness and should have been replaced some years ago. That wasn't really the case, Lance. Talk about the particulars of this pipe.
Sure. This particular pipe had actually been replaced. A lot of people thought, well, it's the same line that happened in 2006 in December. The pipe had actually been replaced completely. And so this was a newer 36-inch PVC pipe that had been put in somewhere around 2007. So it was only about 11 years old. And the only thing that we can think of is just with the location it was in the arroyo and the floodplain, is that the extreme dry that we had with the wet, the moisture, the shifting soils, we were able to actually loosen that bell that caused that failure.
And so people may not realize, as you mentioned, we had months of searing heat, and then all of a sudden we had a week or more of rainfall, and so that causes soils to shift. And they may not realize the tremendous pressure that can put even on a huge pipe such as this.
Sure, absolutely. You know, there's a lot of the ground shifting that you don't realize how much it affects things, but when you have something this large with as much pressure that's undergoing, a slight shift in a bell and on that seal can make a big difference on that pipe and add stresses to it in places it's not supposed to.
And as Nathan mentioned, I mean, the water main replacement occurs on an annual basis. We have a program that addresses that annually. We also have utility lines are being replaced as part of our street reconstruction program. And so in total, the city is actually spending millions per year in water main replacement.
Absolutely. The price tag on the Bell Street alone, you know, the $21 million for that price tag, more than half of that is actually the water and the sewer infrastructure that's going on. And that's one project alone. And so we have millions of dollars in the capital improvement projects and the capital improvement funds that actually go towards those replacements. We have to report that to TCEQ, which is our authority on the water system. And so every year we have multiple projects where lines are being replaced, as well as what even our distribution crews are doing on a regular basis as well.
So you've had some time to think about this now, a few days. In retrospect, do either of you think that there's anything the city could have done in order to have averted this water main break?
I don't know that there is anything necessarily. When we install these water lines, we have inspectors that are watching to see to it that they're installed per the specifications, that the right specs are being followed, and they have to sign off on those things. And so if that pipe was installed today, it would have been installed with the same standard, same oversight that it was at that point in time. And so the reality is that sometimes things happen, and there's not a whole lot you can do about it. Could we have at a cost that was greatly more encased it in concrete or something like that? Sure, we could have, but who would have known that there would have been that much shifting going on? And there's always a means to remedy something. It's just what cost is involved in it and what's the reality and the economic feasibility to do those kinds of things. So.
Someone asked on our Facebook page about the work and just assumed that it was obviously went to the lowest bidder regardless of whether or not they were qualified or could do the job. Educate people, inform people about how that bidding process works whenever it comes to water main replacements.
Sure. Anytime that we are doing infrastructure replacements, there is a low-cost option. However, there's a minimum spec that has to be met. And that minimum spec is basically how it's going to be installed across the board, regardless of what bidder it is. And so there's certain pipe specs that have to be met, certain bedding specs, amount of cover, pressure ratings, testing, chlorination, disinfectant. I mean, there is a whole list of things that they have to meet as a public water system when they do those constructions. And that's not only the stuff that we require as a city, that's also mandated by the state and by EPA and other entities as well.
And I thought it was at times a little humorous, at times I thought it was a little disrespectful, people who assumed that they knew how the pipe should have been installed better than we did. And I did have to point out, we do actually have a whole staff of licensed engineers who actually look over these things, inspect them, draft the plans and so forth. So it's not done, as you mentioned, by the seat of our pants.
No, it's not done on a whim by any means. It is actually a lot of thought that goes into it and a lot of planning. And then also to staging and how we're going to get those things installed and how to maintain the system while they're being installed is a process in itself.
So Nathan, when you get out to the scene of this water leak, describe the scene generally out there.
It was a jungle. I was in awe of how thick the pasture was and the amount of water that it came out, and right off the bat of how we're going to get our equipment to this, because the amount of water and just the pasture, the trees and brush. But luckily we all came together. We worked with other departments. The operations department just jumped right in immediately, brought in equipment.
We'll talk about what they actually did in order to get the equipment out to that location, because this is truly amazing.
Yes, I mean, it was the next morning that the operations street and bridge showed up in just full force, like calling in the cavalry. We had like 9 or 10 dump trucks. I believe we've hauled in 700 cubic yards of limestone. We had to build a road to get to it, so we could work, because just the sheer amount of water that had came out of the pipe, and just from where it was too. But yeah, the operations worked with us. Just there they were the next morning. They brought their equipment out. They worked into the night, the second night. And got us a road where we could start working on it. We started working that night immediately once we could get to it. And that's what even took us maybe a little bit longer, was just where it was at and the amount of time it took to build the road to get to it, or we would have started even sooner, actual repair of it. But we lost a day to just trying to get to the pipe. So
there was a road, and then there was also a pad that they built in order to put all this heavy equipment out there.
Yes, sir. They had to build several pads right there, just because the ground was so saturated. Our equipment kept sinking, so they built us a pad so we could start working on the pipe, and it was truly amazing. The two departments working together, coming together, and getting things done. And I'm just happy to say I work for an organization like this where we can all work together and get something like that accomplished so quickly, for everyone.
There also was quite a bit of water at that site up above the ground. So, I mean, you can't start digging when you've got a couple of feet of water. So how did y'all navigate that?
Well, what they ended up doing is the leak was actually right near the Red Arroyo. And so that area had already been pretty saturated and was already kind of swampy from the rains. And then, of course, with the amount of water that we put on it from the leak, there was, easily 2 to 3 to 4 feet deep of water just over the ground level. And so as they began to build the pad and the roadway to it and access it, we actually purposely built that in such of a way that we could actually block off some of that water and then actually pump out the area that we were trying to work in. So rather than trying to pump the whole area, we had actually created almost a little dike with what we were doing construction-wise, so that way we could actually get to it and pump out just the area we needed. And so, but that did mean that as we were pumping it out and working on it, the guys were in a 9 to 10 foot deep hole, and essentially there was a pool of water right outside of the dry area that was up above their heads, basically.
Oh, wow. So Nathan, walk us through what happens when the digging begins.
Well, in this particular leak, we didn't have to actually do a whole lot of digging because the leak was so large, it kind of dug itself out. But once we got our heavy...
Do you mean that it sort of blew the soil away from it?
Yes, sir. The pressure was, phenomenal, and it pretty well dug itself out. Once we got our equipment in there, we had to do some shoring for safety reasons and clear out, just a little bit. But it pretty well dug itself. We could see the pipe, after we got the leak isolated. But once we got our equipment in there and started kind of shoring it back for safety reasons, where the guys could get in there and just start working on it, a local contractor jumped in and helped us. There was a large amount of rock that was there as well, and we were able to utilize some of their equipment and break the rock up, and they jumped in and helped us out. They knew we didn't have the equipment that they had to deal with the rock, but we all came together, and once things get in motion and a plan gets built up, so to speak, everything starts falling into place. We had to order some parts. They came in from Houston, because those type of leaks we just don't have. You just don't anticipate that, and it's hard to figure out what you're going to need anyhow and see into the future. But we had some parts hot-shotted in to us from Houston that came in late Wednesday night, I believe, and then we were finally able to start putting things together, once the parts got here.
So Lance, Nathan mentioned about the rock. So there was actually rock, I think you told me like about 3 inches just below the pipe, and you needed to clear that out in order to cut that section of the pipe free.
Right. There was rock just about 3 to 6 inches right below that pipe. And for us to get the equipment in to cut the pipe, and then also too, the clamps that we had to install actually fit over the outside of that pipe with lugs and bolts that have to be tightened. And so for us to physically be able to make the repair, we had to actually go through and break out rock down below the pipe to clear that out. And so Darnell Construction, I don't mind saying that, were the ones that we made a phone call to. They had a long reach hoe ram, which is basically just a super heavy duty jackhammer on a piece of equipment that came out, and they actually knocked out about 18 inches below of rock for us, got that out of the hole for us so that we could access everything like we needed to. And we were able to do that. And Nathan had mentioned also too about us ordering parts, and we've had a lot of people say, well, why can't you keep every part on the shelf? Well, the reality of it is that gaskets will dry out over time. If something is sitting on the shelf for 2 or 3 years, those gaskets get brittle, and once those gaskets get brittle, or sometimes the parts will actually have some surface rust and things like that. And the other thing too is you never know exactly what part, because if it's a break at a bell, it may be a different part than if it is in the middle of the pipe. And so is it a T, is it a union, is it a valve? There's all these other variables, and if we were to stock every single part for every single scenario on every single pipe size of every material we have, we would have such a stock room that, and
you're looking at millions of dollars worth of stock that would just be sitting there,
hoping that it would be used someday.
Right.
So it's a matter of, first of all, you'd have to have a warehouse large enough to house all this.
Sure.
Yes, these parts are huge, and we have a large inventory for what we typically deal with, the 6-inch, 8-inch leaks, 2-inch, 4-inch, etc. And we keep all that stocked. But these are just you can't foresee what the problem's going to be on something, a leak of this magnitude. And luckily we don't have these leaks like this, you know, not very often at all. So we're fortunate there that these large pipes do not break, you know, when they more often.
So Nathan, is every repair different and unique in its own way?
Yes and no. I mean, you just don't know. And like Lance was saying, it can be a T that blows out, the pipe splits. That's what happened in this particular case. It was a 20-foot joint of pipe that completely split. And we do have splits that happen. And so many times we're able to go in there with clamps and put clamps, and the guys get out, and people don't even know that there's been a water leak or any loss of service or anything. But for the most part, yes, these big, large leaks, it's just, we're just fortunate they don't happen, you know, very often, and we're able to get in there and get this one repaired very quickly.
So you cut out this piece of pipe and then you just stick another sort of replacement piece in there and clamp it to the remaining infrastructure?
Yes, we did have pipe in stock, so we were fortunate there. We just didn't have the fittings because you can't foresee what's going to happen, and we had the fittings shipped in. So
is this work 24/7?
Yes, it is. These guys, that, you know, I'm fortunate enough to have a great group of guys. They don't complain, they don't gripe, they don't stop until the leak's, you know, finished. I mean, they're exhausted. This particular one, they were extremely exhausted just for the sheer magnitude of the size of the pipe. But not just this one, so many of them are 24/7 leaks. The guys work all night long trying to, you know, get the water down where they can work on the leaks. And you know, I'm just fortunate enough to have a great group of guys that are relentless until they get the job completed. So
it may be surprising to people. I mean, how many people do you have on your water distribution crew in order to address these 600 plus miles of pipe in our community?
Oh, when we're fully staffed, we've got around 40 guys. We're not fully staffed right now. I would say I've got a good 20 guys that are, you know, alternate call. And in a leak like this, we had all hands on deck, and we still had crews keeping up with other emergencies throughout the city as well that were going on. We had several other considerable leaks that were happening as well. But there's a good 20 guys that are ready to go at any time, you know.
And I'm sure, because I know there's no way you could fully appreciate it unless you've been there, and our viewers would certainly fit into that category. But what's it like down in that hole whenever they're involved in a repair? And a lot of times, I want to point out, this is done either in the searing heat of July or August, or it might be at 2 o'clock on a January morning that these repairs are happening. So what's it like down there in that hole?
It's dangerous. It's dangerous to say the least. There's huge parts moving around. There's saws moving around. You got to worry about cave-ins. That's why we have to shore it back. Yeah, these guys put a lot on the line, and it really, you know, disturbs me when people have disrespectful things to say about city employees standing around. You know, all those guys are working. They may not be working right at the moment that the picture is taken, but these guys they all know their roles. Whether there's only so many people can fit down in a hole to do the work. You've got to have guys up on top to get tools, to man the pumps that are running equipment, and you've got spectators as well on something like this. So it makes us sometimes look like not everyone's working, but all those guys have a very important role in assuring that the leak is done in a timely fashion.
Well, and you mentioned it's dangerous, so there's also some good safety reasons for having extra people there in case someone has to be pulled out of a hole in a quick situation.
Yes, you've got guys watching for certain things that can happen, you know, and it's just, there's a lot of moving parts, and you've got the heavy machinery, and just so many things can go wrong with any job site. And we're fortunate this particular one, everything was okay.
Well, and in this instance, you didn't have to deal with something that you usually have to deal with, and that is traffic.
We didn't have traffic.
People don't understand, but they're also trying to keep traffic from driving into or over a hole.
Traffic is a problem a lot of times. People are on cell phones, not paying attention, and just, traffic is our #1 concern a lot of times for safety issues for my crew.
And I think what's interesting too is a lot of people, they see the snapshot of the picture, and it's easy to make a quick judgment. Oh, hey, there's only one guy working and there's 3 guys on the side. But what they didn't see though was the 30 seconds prior to that was the excavator taking out a big bucket of of rock that they're excavating. So everybody moves out of the way for the excavator to take the scoop. And then as the excavator is taking the scoop and moving it, then people are jumping back in and doing whatever work they can while they're waiting for the next bucket load to come. And so that's oftentimes why there's people above and in the hole, because there may be equipment that's, or materials or parts that's being passed down. I can tell you that there was one instance when we were bringing down the section of pipe, and so we had 4 or 5 guys up on top of the hole guiding it down. Then we had some guys on another benched area passing it down to guys that were even further below. And so there, at any one time, there may be 20 or 30 guys down there that are coordinating this effort to see to it that tools are going back and forth and that everyone's being monitored. And that's the thing that people oftentimes don't see. They see the snapshot of that 1 second in time and not necessarily the choreography of the work that's being done and the whole picture.
Yeah. Well, you know, obviously in our community, our first responders and people think of them as being police and fire get a lot of respect, and deservedly so. But I think this sort of highlighted another situation, that our water distribution guys are first responders, because whenever a leak happens, they rush out to the scene, they climb into a hole and try to make things make things right again.
And I saw a couple of comments that, you know, oh great, they're doing what they get paid for. But I can tell you that the dedication that those guys have is above and beyond. We had one particular guy that put his vacation off. He was supposed to be going on vacation Wednesday, and he put his vacation off until the leak was done. And that shows the commitment level. We had another guy say that, you know, he kept waking up in the middle of the night and his wife asked him, "You're thinking about how to fix that leak, aren't you?" And he said, "Yeah, that's exactly what I'm doing." And so, you know, these guys take their job seriously, and they're committed to the city, and they're committed to doing the work. And a lot of people don't realize it. Yeah, we get paid for it, but you know, there isn't anyone in this department that went home and slept easy over any of these nights when this was going on. And that's sometimes the part of it that people don't really realize.
Well, and yes, they do get paid, but let's be clear about this. It is not handsomely. No. Like you,
yeah, it's not.
Nathan, you could not convince me to climb in that hole for the money that you
putting their lives on the line, and you know, it's not oil field wage by any means what they get paid, but they're dedicated and they do a good job for what they do get paid. And I couldn't be more proud of the group of guys and all the other departments that worked, you know, hand in hand together on this to assure that it was, and it happens, there's other instances where we work with other departments and everybody's utilized as well, but this particular event, you know, everybody came together and we were down for a very short period of time.
So it's important to note, I think I mentioned this earlier, Lance, but it is important to note that no contaminants were ever found in any of the many water samples that our water quality lab conducted throughout this process. But we couldn't talk about that publicly, and explain why that is.
Well, the reason why we can't is because it's a precautionary advisory to boil water. And what we have to realize is that we don't want to give people a false sense to not take this seriously. And so that's one thing that we have to be really kind of on the balance of, is although that we did not find any samples, you know, we did not believe that there was any contamination to be concerned about. But at the same time, the guidance says that, hey, this is a precautionary measure. You issue the boil water notice, and that is in the event that there is a problem, then it can be dealt with. But at no time did we ever have any samples that have come back negative in our water system that would have necessarily warranted concern.
So in other words, the state doesn't want us issuing a boil water notice, but then sort of telling people, but don't worry about that.
Right,
you know,
right.
It's a mixed message if you do that.
It is, and that's the thing that we have to also be cautious about is, yes, okay, we've issued a boil water notice. Okay, what about an RO system? What about this scenario? What about that scenario? Well, we're under a boil water notice, and so we recommend to everyone to boil the water. Now, does that mean necessarily that the ice tray that was from last night is contaminated and that you can't use that? Not necessarily, but at the same time, we have to have that cautionary mentality so that way that we are all, both the state, the city, and everyone is kind of on that same playing field.
You know, this was an inconvenience for some people, but I think in the whole scheme of things, it's important to keep in mind it was just that. It was an inconvenience. This was not a Flint, Michigan situation where, you know, you can't boil something out of the water, and it wasn't a situation such as people might be facing right now in the aftermath of Hurricane Florence, where they don't have water at all. So I think it is important to sort of keep that context. And I also think if there's a silver lining to this whole thing for Nathan, your guys in water distribution, is that people were exposed to a vital public service that they take for granted every day, and the people who work to provide that service on a daily basis.
Yeah, people just expect the water to flow out of that tap when it comes on, and people are usually upset when it doesn't work. It's just human nature. You want things to work. Along with the wastewater, when you flush that toilet, you want it to go somewhere, not stay there in your house. And that's when my guys are behind the scenes, 24/7. You know, during the holidays, guys are on call and they're constantly out working. And this does shed light, and so many people were very appreciative and gave us shout outs and, you know, good jobs, and understand what we do go through to ensure the safety of it, you know, all the citizens of San Angelo, and that we deliver a safe product. And I just can't say once again, you know, all the departments coming together, especially my guys, and all the hard work that they do. It's really a joy to work with these guys.
Well, they were certainly under the microscope, huge spotlight on them, and you guys have got to be proud that they shine like a penny.
Yep.
So anyway, if you ever see one of our water distribution guys out in the community, maybe at a restaurant, I bet you they would appreciate it if you'd slap them on the back and tell them, good job, shake their hands, who knows, maybe even buy them a meal. We've been talking with our Assistant Water Director, Lance Overstreet, our Water Distribution Superintendent, Nathan Tim, and we hope you'll join us for the next episode of The City.